friends, welcome or welcome back to my channel. I'm Katarina, or Kat if you're new here, and this is my channel of everything cozy, bookish, and lifestyle related. And in today's video, we are going to be discussing my fall TBR. From everything pumpkin spice to cozy related and the changing of the colors, it definitely is feeling like fall where I am. Now, I'm not somebody that usually creates a TBR. I am a big mood reader. I tend to go with what I'm feeling and what I'm in the mood for. However, there are quite a few books that I want to get to before the end of the year, and I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to not only tackle my backlist TBR, but to also read a little bit more during the fall season. And I'm hoping that I can get to a lot of these books. So I pretty much have a wide range of genres when it comes to my fall TBR. We have classics, we have literary fiction, we have magical realism, we have historical fiction, we have fantasy, we have sci-fi, and I believe there's one horror in there somewhere. So let's talk about the books that I would love to read this fall. So to start off, let's talk about the books that fall under that classic / dark academia genre. And the first one starting off is a classic that I've had on my eye on for quite some time. It's also one that I've noticed a lot of people get into and I've absolutely loved, and that is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, about a young individual that makes a deal with, I believe, the devil for youth and beauty. And obviously, you know, when you sell your soul for youth and beauty, there's always going to be consequences. But I'm definitely excited to read this one and pick this one up during that fall season. So next book that I would love to read during the fall is definitely a fall classic. It is one that many people know, even if you have not read the classic, and that is Dracula by Bram Stoker. Dracula and anything to do with vampires is absolutely some of my favorite stories. I definitely want to read the original vampire. Then from there, delving into dark academia, there is one book that I think everyone can name when it comes to dark academia. Well, there's a few books, and that is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This has been on my wish list for quite some time, and I finally picked it up during my birthday so that I could read it during the fall season. Anytime you type in annotating books or dark academia within Pinterest, you get The Secret History. So I'm very interested to read this one. We're gonna see how I like it. All I know about The Secret History is that there is a murder mystery partially involved and that there is a university involved with very morally great characters. That's all I know about this one. Then from there, another very popular dark academia book that I wanted to pick up last year but didn't have the time to, and that was Babel, An Arcane History by R.F. Kuang. I absolutely loved R.F. Kuang's The Poppy War. Her writing is absolutely stunning. This takes place where a young boy is taken from China and he is raised to be a scholar, and that there is this type of translation magic. That is pretty much all I know about Babel, but again, it takes place in a dark academia setting at, I think, Oxford. Then the last book that falls under the dark academia classic literature genre of the books that I want to read during this fall is one of which I have attempted to read twice, and I'm going to give it a third try, and that is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I was not a big fan of Grishaverse, I will admit it, so I think I went into this book with the same expectations of Shadow and Bone, which were very low. So I'm going to try to go into it with no expectations this time and more focus on the academia, dark academia setting. I'm just going to give it one more chance, and if I do not like it a third time, or I DNF it a third time, then we're just going to call it quits and accept that I will never like Leigh Bardugo's writing. Moving on from the fall books that I would like to read that are under the classic dark academia literary fiction genre, we are going into historical fiction. There are a few historical fiction books that I would love to get to, and the first being Deep as the Sky, Red as the Sea. This follows a female Chinese pirate that actually existed in our history, and I think that that is just super cool. It follows a young woman where her husband is slain by a Portuguese pirate, and she is kind of trying to take control of the pirate army. However, at the same time, you have the Chinese emperor who just announced a very big award to anyone that will take out all of the pirates. So I'm very excited to potentially get to this one in the fall season. We have Lady Tan's Circle of Women by Lisa C. This is another one that takes place in China, and it follows once again another woman that was real in history. It was a woman that was raised by her grandparents to be useful, and they taught her Chinese medicine and to be a female doctor. However, in society, females that are doctors cannot treat men, and so she's struggling with not only being married into a prominent family where her mother-in-law doesn't want her to be anything but a quiet, meek woman. This sounds very interesting, and I'm looking forward to reading it. Then finally, this was one that doesn't really fall under historical fiction, but it's based off of a few historical events, and that is He Who Drowned the World by Shelley Parker Chan. This is the sequel to She Who Became the Sun, that follows a young girl who takes over her brother's identity when he dies and rises to greatness. Shelley Parker Chan has such an amazing way of writing a very detailed book but still keeping you captured, so I'm very interested in continuing the story. Then from there, we're going into two books that I really didn't have a genre for, and the first being The Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan. This is a memoir by Lady Trent. It follows an elderly woman. You know, she's in her elderly age and she is telling the stories of how she became this great dragon biologist naturalist. I think it's supposed to be kind of a cozy fantasy as well. I think this is like, there's like 9 books to this series. There's like dragons, there's serpents, I think there's basilisks. And then the next book is definitely more magical realism, and that is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I have heard wonderful things about this one. I've also heard not so great things about this one. I do know, however, that everyone is obsessed with Erin Morgenstern's The Night Circus series. I have not read it yet, but this one sounded interesting to me because there's like a labyrinth underneath the earth of rooms filled with stories. That don't know much else about this one. Then the only horror book that I have in my list of fall books that I would like to get to is Slewfoot by Braun. This is a Tales of Bewitchery, and let me just read the synopsis to you. An ancient spirit awakens in a dark wood. The wild folk call him Father, Slayer, Protector. The colonists call him Slewfoot, Demon, Devil. To Abatha, a recently widowed outcast, alone and vulnerable in her pious village, he is the only one she can turn to for help. Together they ignite a battle between pagan and Puritan, one that threatens to destroy the entire village, leaving nothing but ashes and bloodshed in its wake. That sounded absolutely amazing to me. It also says it's set in a colonial New England. That even sounds even better. Interested to like jump into the horror genre to see if I enjoy that kind of genre, because I do like thrillers, but I don't read horror. And moving on to my final genre of my fall TBR, and that is fantasy. There are quite a few fantasy books that I would love to get to this fall. So one of the fantasies that I would love to pick up is The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. This is the sequel to The Final Empire, or this is the second book in the Mistborn trilogy. I absolutely loved The Final Empire, and if you don't know what it's about, I would definitely go recommend you checking it out. It is a wonderful fantasy series. If you ever want to get into fantasy, or if you're just getting into fantasy, or specifically adult fantasy, I highly recommend picking up the Mistborn trilogy. It is very easy, it is very accessible, and Brandon Sanderson does an amazing job at writing his fantasy, and his world buildings and his plot and his characters are so wonderful and so likable, and I'm very excited to continue. I did start this one at the beginning of this year, however, I was in a very bad reading slump and put it aside because I just couldn't concentrate on a big fantasy book. Then we have a very popular TikTok fantasy romance that when I read the first book, I enjoyed it enough where I decided I am going to pick up the second book, and that is The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King by Carissa Broadbent. This follows a human woman that lives in a vampire world, and her father was the vampire king, and then she ended up going into these like vampire trials to make a wish with the vampire goddess. That is the first book. That is the synopsis of the first book. So want to continue with this duology. I have not read the novellas. I should probably read the novellas before I get into this final book. I feel like, once again, it's a vampire-esque book. It takes place with vampires, takes place in a fantasy world. What better time to read it than during the spooky fall season? Then the next fantasy book that I would love to read this fall is another very popular book. It's all over TikTok, it's all over Instagram, it's all over YouTube, it's all over everywhere. I can't turn my head without seeing this book somewhere, and I've actually already read it in another video that's going to be coming out a little bit later this month, and that is Fourth Ring by Rebecca Yarros. I had put this book off for so long. I talk about it more in that vlog that is going to be coming out, but I did read this. You can see that it's sort of tabbed. So it is a book that is technically already checked off of my fall TBR, but I still want to include it in this video just to let you know that it was on my TBR. And then the final book that is on, just in general, my entire fall TBR, and that is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. This is another one that I've had my eye on for quite some time. I wanted to pick it up, but never really did. And then my husband got it for me for my birthday, and I've read the synopsis for it, and it just sounds really great. It has trials in it, but the trials and the challenges takes place in space, which if any book has a trial or a challenge or a quest in it, I am all for it. And then this one also takes place in space, and there's a rebellion. And it's not one that I know a lot about. I once again have stayed away from any discussion or any like spoilers around Red Rising. A lot of my friends really recommended this book to me and said that I would really enjoy it. Alright guys, so there is my entire Fall TBR. Is it ambitious? Yes. Should I probably take some of the books off of the list so that I could potentially get to most of them? Also yes. Am I going to? No. Because a lot of these books are ones that I would love to get to before the end of the year. Is it going to happen? Most likely not. There's so many books that I would love to get to this fall, and most likely won't happen. And also, I'm still a mood reader, so even though I created this TBR, am I going to follow the TBR? That is the main question. I hope so, would be my answer, but knowing me, it's up to the unknown at this point. It is up to the unknown. But definitely leave in the comments below what books you plan on reading in the fall time, or if there are any fall recommendations that you think I would really enjoy and should definitely pick up this fall. Also leave that in the comments below. And also make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel for new videos like this. I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!